Hey everyone, I found this channel called The Righteous Judge with a bunch of bite-sized videos containing individual arguments. It's perfect, I can talk about a bunch of different topics instead of repeating myself 150 times like I did with that Emmanuel guy last time. So to start with, I think I'll try, who is Jesus?
So God has been telling me something for about over 3 years now. He's been telling me that, believe it or not, and you won't believe it, I guarantee that.
Oh, don't worry about that, I'm an atheist. I don't believe anything.
But if you are wise and you are smart and you like to think and ponder things, then you may consider this, especially since I communicate with God and I know He exists.
I do like to think and ponder, and whatever it is, I will consider it, but I don't quite get how your belief that you talk to God would make your claim more worthy of consideration. It doesn't make it less worthy either, it's just kinda not relevant. I don't know, maybe this video is directed at those not-so-smart Christians who find a claim instantly more believable when you tell them it's straight from God.
He's been telling me that I am Jesus.
Oh, I didn't realize you were like that. So what do I do here, guys? Avoid feeding the troll? Put the kid gloves on? Mock the weird belief as per usual? I can't decide. Guess I'll go with the kid gloves.
That's what he's been telling me.
Yeah, weirdly, that's what he's been telling a lot of different people for quite a while now. Is Jesus kind of a hive mind with the individual Jesuses, Jezera? Where each Jesus is a component of the overall intelligence, the super Jesus, if you will.
Now at first, I couldn't believe it. I said, yeah, right, bullshit.
Nah, really? But it was straight from God's mouth to your brain. What's the problem? Don't you believe God?
But over these past, 2 weeks, I've been asking again, and he's been giving me signs up the wazoo.
That's an odd place to put a bunch of signs. How'd you get your head up there to read them?
I'm kind of on the borderline of it. I'm kind of well, if I am cool, but whatever.
Whatever? Dude, if you're Jesus, that's no attitude to have. There's a lot of responsibility in that role, sir. Do you know how much work Jesus 1.0 put into perfecting those water walking and wine tricks? And yet here you are, 30? I don't know. And you haven't even perfected the turning your phone sideways trick yet.
Now, if I am Jesus, then it would explain that I've been born again. If I am Jesus, then I've been born again. And in order to see the kingdom of God, you need to be born again.
So does that mean everyone who's born again is also a Jesus? Is that the idea? There has to be some explanation for how born-again Christians are born again, and them being Jezi is it. Or does there just need to be an explanation for you specifically being born again, but not for other people, and so those people's born-againness doesn't require the explanation of Jesusism? Man, these rules are so confusing.
Now this points to my beliefs, because I've been born again. So it points to my beliefs. Do you see?
No, I don't. The Christian concept of being born again has nothing to do with the born-again Christians being Jesuses. I wish you'd explain it a little further, because it's kind of a half-thought right now, and I'm actually kind of fascinated. But this seems to be your only video about it.
So, kind of weird that God would relay this to me, but He did. Believe it or not, Christians, He did.
Okay, well, while all the Christians fall to their knees before the glory of their re-resurrected Lord and Master, how about the rest of us move on to something more substantial? How about what I believe is supposed to be cleverly titled, Nope!
So, quick question to refute evolution. How is it that we survived when the eyeball had to be, made? We would literally be blind until the success of the eyeball was finished. Or finished halfway. But even if it wasn't finished halfway or a quarter of the way, or enough to see, we would be blind for how long, according to evolution?
Did I make the wrong choice with the kid gloves? I'm starting to feel like the don't feed the troll thing might have been the better option here. But I'll leave that up to the viewers and push forward. So, before I answer, I'll start with a question. When you ask how we survived, who exactly do you mean? Do you mean humans? How did humans survive with partial eyeballs? Is that the question? Or is it more, how did life in general survive before any organism had eyeballs? I guess I'll answer them both. The answer to the first one is that evolution doesn't posit that the human species was built up piece by piece from scratch, with half an eyeball here and half a testicle there. I don't know what theory of human origins you're you're thinking of, but it's sure as hell no version of evolution. And the answer to the second one is that eyeballs are not necessary for all life to survive, which is why you see plenty of successful species with no eyeballs. In fact, for simpler early life forms, sight wouldn't have been important, just like how it's not important for, say, bacteria today. What would have been a lot more important is the ability to detect useful or dangerous chemicals in the environment, specifically the water, or in other words, a rudimentary sense of smell. So whichever way I take your question, it doesn't make any sense. Maybe you're trying to make some outdated, irreducible complexity kind of argument about the eye, but you didn't make it, so fuck it.
So there you go. No evolution. Doesn't exist. And that's proof.
Sure, whatever. Next, let's do something from the Intellect of an Atheist series. That ought to be good.
Atheists like to say that there is no intelligent design. Now, what exactly would you call the complexity of the cells on a microscopic level?
I'd call it complexity, I guess.
You know, how everything needs to connect to one another in order to make something function. You know, if I wasn't smart, I wouldn't know what that meant. What that meant. But clearly, there's a design. And clearly, it has to be intelligent. Number 9.
Huh. You know, for a second there, I almost wasn't convinced. I was thinking stupid stuff, like the mere fact that multicellular organisms require their cells to function together to survive doesn't tell you anything about either the origin of life or the history of life on Earth. At least not all by its lonesome, like you presented it. All you did was mention it. You didn't even try to explain why it implies a conscious designer as opposed to unconscious, it survived so it's here development via evolution, or for that matter any other idea that's ever been put forth. And then after making no argument, you told me the answer is clear. And as I said, I wasn't the most convinced. But then, you hit me with this look. And suddenly, deep down in the greasy depths of my moldering soul, I just knew. When Jesus himself gives you that look, you can't keep denying the truth. Who cares if there was no spoken argument? That look's the only argument I need. Okay, I'm back. Sorry for disappearing for like 30 seconds there. I just got really thirsty all of a sudden. I had to go and get a drink. Did I miss anything? Oh, looks like the video's over. Alright, how about Intellect of an Atheist 7?
Atheists are quite stupid.
Oh, that's cool. Fuck you too.
Here's the intellect of one. They tried to disprove God, but you clearly cannot see God. You don't know if he exists. I do, but that's besides the point. They're trying to disprove a negative. How can you possibly do that? You don't know if it's there. How can you disprove something that you don't know is there?
So unless you can see a thing, by which I assume you mean unless it would be visible if it existed, you can't disprove its existence because you're trying to disprove a negative. Or in other words, prove a double negative. Or in other words, prove a positive. That's a silly way to put it. I mean, obviously, for one thing, you shouldn't have said disprove a negative, you should have said prove a negative. The negative in question being the statement, God does not exist. But more importantly, it's just incorrect to make a blanket statement that you can't prove a negative. The whole point of falsifiability is that you can, it just depends what the claim is. If you hand me a coin and you tell me it's gold, and I test it and I find out that it's copper, I've proven the negative. The coin is not gold. Or at least it's proven to the degree people usually mean when they talk about proving a fact about the world, whether negative or positive, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. The difficulty with proving a negative to that level comes in when the person making the claim attempts to retreat to an unfalsifiable position. So if I come back to you with my report on all the different tests I did on your coin and all the ways it does not resemble gold, maybe you'll just say, oh no, it is gold, but it's being cloaked by a super advanced alien species' technology so that when it's tested by any means, it'll show up as copper. It's their version of an anti-theft device. Well, there's not really a way for me to prove that's not the case, is there? I could certainly point out that there's no known mechanism by which that could work, but you could just claim that's because I'm a primitive human who still cooks steaks with fire instead of microwaves even though it's the 23rd century. Thanks to your strong desire to believe or have others believe your claim, you're threatening threshold for what constitutes a reasonable doubt has been pushed so far that there's no way for me to prove anything beyond it. Your claim has become unfalsifiable. And over the years, theists have been doing this more and more with their gods. You can't detect this god with any of the senses unless you put the cart before the horse and believe it first, of course, in which case apparently you can have a fucking conversation with it. No instrument can detect it. It's not even in the universe, so nothing in the universe can detect it. But there's one critical flaw, which is that theists, yourself included, still love to make what they think are logical arguments for God's existence by showing how it's consistent with this or that feature of reality. Take, for example, your half an argument. Multicellular organisms are complex, and only an intelligent designer is consistent with complexity, therefore God. Or however you would rather I phrase it. Well, if you think the consistency of God's proposed traits with himself or with the world can be determined via logical arguments, which then function as proof of his existence, maybe you also think their inconsistency can be argued for that way as well, and those arguments can function as proof of his non-existence. If you want to be consistent, you should. And this form of disproof doesn't require God to be visible at all. Well, that was boring. Is number 6 any better?
So here is the intellect of an atheist. God of the gaps. That is usually assigned to us Christians or believers in God, etc., etc. All that does, though, is simply show the ignorance of the atheist, because they do not understand the arguments given, which is why they assign God of the gaps. The intellect of an atheist, number 6.
So what's your contention here then? That when a Christian's argument is called a God of the gaps argument, it never is? Or at least rarely is? Because, like it or not, Christians do have a bad habit of trying to jam God into plain old knowledge gaps when there's no indication that he really fits there. If you want an example, how about that one video of yours I looked at earlier? How are multicellular organisms so complex? Therefore God. That's the basic argument you presented. If there was supposed to be anything more to it, then there's a gap in my knowledge, so only God can fit there, you didn't present it. If you really believe you're not making God of the gaps arguments, maybe you should be more careful to flesh out your arguments so they don't come off so much that way. Oh, and no, number 6 wasn't really better, was it? Alright, let's get off the Intellect of an Atheist series and try Notable Existence of God.
This might not be very compelling to some people.
Impossible! Have confidence, righteous judge. I'm sure you'll do better this time.
But, cause and effect. I can think of God being imperfectness. Imperfectness. And that would be the height of the intellect. To be able to think of him in perfectness.
The height of the intellect is to be able to think of God in perfectness, whatever the hell that's supposed to mean, and you can think of God in perfectness, so is it just me or is the implication that you've achieved the height of the intellect? Well, call me a lowly doofus stranded on the intellectual foothills, if you will, but I'm not convinced. Maybe I'd be more convinced if you'd bothered to explain at all what it means to think of someone in perfectness. Does it mean to understand the definition of the word perfect and then apply it to them accurately? Does it mean to conjure up an image of an entire perfect being in exact detail in your imagination? We're left guessing here, because if you had any precise meaning in mind, you kept it to yourself.
What I mean by perfectness is to be able to do anything and to be anything and, stuff like that.
Okay, if that's what you mean by it, fair enough, I guess, but that's no definition I've ever heard or would accept, because then, for example, if you were to talk about, say, a perfect circle, what you would mean is a superpowered circle that can do anything and be anything, including a square.
You know exactly what I mean to define God as perfectness.
No, I really don't. Oh, I know what your goofy definition of perfectness is now, sure. But now you're telling me you're not only defining God as perfect, but as perfectness itself. I know what it would mean for something to be perfect. Humans come up with some standard of what we think the best version of a thing would look like, based on what we think is better and worse. And if the thing matches exactly to our standard, if we decide it's complete by conforming to every part of the standard, if we think it's flawless by not deviating from the standard, if we think it serves whatever purpose we assign to it without fault, then we call it perfect. The perfection of the thing is as subjective as moral goodness or badness, for example, because although the thing can be objectively compared precisely to the standard itself was made up by us in the first place. What counts as better or worse is fundamentally arbitrary and based on human preference. Just like how the basic goals that we build our moral rules upon came from us, even if certain actions objectively help or hinder us in the achievement of those goals. But I have absolutely no idea what it would mean for something to be perfectness, since that word describes the state of a thing, not the thing itself. It'd be like looking at my glasses and saying that their colors are redness and blueness.
It's the height of our intellect.
Still don't know what that's supposed to mean.
So therefore he would exist.
Right, well, saw that coming. You're going for a version of the ontological argument then. God is defined as perfect, or perfectness. Existence is a perfection of a thing, not just a basic requirement to be any kind of thing at all, however perfect or imperfect it might be, because I think it should be. Shut up. Therefore God exists. Not only is yours an extremely poor presentation of the argument because you left half of it out, but even the better versions start to fall apart once you squint at the word perfect, or greatness, or excellence, or whatever they want to use. What exactly does it mean? Well, it doesn't mean that just having a particular trait makes you perfect. That leads back to the problem of your superpowered circle. And what would make you inherently more or less perfect if you had, say, omnipotence, omniscience, or omnibenevolence, but not omni-purpleness, omni-hairiness, or omni-horniness? And what in the definition of the word perfect means something is necessarily more perfect than nothing? Is there some objective law that transcends God that dictates the superiority of having more power to having less, or of knowing more to knowing less, or of being more morally good, whatever that might mean to you, to being less good, or of some particular thing existing to it not existing? Maybe you'll say, yes, God is bound by these rules, and these things are defined by the nature of reality as objectively perfect. But don't they sound suspiciously like humans projecting their priorities onto reality itself? We like power. Being able to do more things helps us survive and get more of what we want. We like knowledge. It helps us decide what to eat and where to get it and what to avoid. And we feel like the world makes more sense when we think we know something about it. We like goodness. A society where people prefer to cooperate rather than struggle and fight and kill and steal makes survival easier and makes life a lot less harsh for us. And we like to exist because animals have a survival instinct, and so we have a deep conviction that our existence is all important even if we can't quite express why. Religious ideas like gods and souls and afterlives are partially an attempt to provide an answer to that why through stories. My point being, all of these perfect attributes of God sound awfully like the things humans find important just because they help us get by, and not much like some deep truth about the nature of reality itself. If someone claims God is perfect because he has these traits, to me it just sounds like theists taking the things that they value for, at the root, basic survival reasons, and assuming that because they find these things important, reality itself shares their priorities. It's the same thing they do with concepts like goodness and meaning and purpose and beauty and so on. I'm sure there must be a word for this kind of thinking, maybe a sort of false consensus bias, but applied not just to other people, but to the whole of reality. I'm not sure. Viewers, any ideas? But okay, you might think, so maybe that way of defining perfection is a little flawed, so what if instead we say that what makes God perfect isn't which traits he has, but that whichever traits he does have, say power, knowledge, goodness, and so on, he has at their highest possible level, say infinity. So in other words, his traits are perfected because, by human standards, more power, knowledge, and goodness is seen as better than less, even if there's no objective truth to this, and something with infinite power, knowledge, and goodness would be just as good as something with very little of it, if nobody was around to arbitrarily declare one of them better. But I digress. So if we think about it this way, then perfection doesn't come from possessing any particular trait. Adding or subtracting traits doesn't change the level of perfection of anything, because in this way of thinking, perfection only means that whatever traits a thing has are perfect themselves, and it's no less perfect for lacking any other traits you can think of. I don't hear anyone arguing that God's not perfect because he's not purple. Infinitely, completely purple. And so, by this concept of perfection, a God that has the trait of existence is no more perfect than a God that doesn't, because your perfection is not in which traits you possess, but the quality of the traits you do possess. I'll leave it up to other people to argue about whether it even makes sense to describe existence as a trait that something possesses. To make it more clear, think of a circle. What is a perfect circle? It's the set of all points equidistant from another point. And the perfection of a circle is purely in whether every single point is exactly equidistant from the center with no inconsistency consistency. The circle isn't less perfect because it lacks power or knowledge or anything else. And likewise, you would never draw a circle on the left side of the screen and no circle on the right, and then proclaim that clearly the circle on the left is the superior of the two circles. That'd be madness. But that's exactly what the ontological argument does with God.
Now, like I said in the beginning, it's not going to be very compelling. I hardly think it's very compelling.
Well, good. At least we're on roughly the same page about something. I'd say it's not compelling at all, but close enough.
But it's notable, I would say.
Is it, though? If it's not compelling, what's notable about it? Well, again, you leave your thought process unstated, so I guess who cares? So let's do one more. But how about something completely different? Evidence of no hell. Well, without seeing it, I at least appreciate that title. What a nice change of pace.
So let's see if you guys can figure this out.
I doubt it. You seem to only speak in half-finished thoughts. It's hard to complete them for you sometimes.
Love by design. God designed reality. He develops it because everything started, therefore he's developing reality every second that goes by. Every millisecond that goes by, he's developing. So you can see God's will from the way that human nature is. Our nature is to love one another, to find a partner and to be with them for the rest of our lives.
Says you. That assumes that monogamy and the urge to find a single lifelong partner is entirely natural and not cultural, and I'm not so sure, but it's certainly widespread, so I'll accept it just to get onto the more important bits. A lot of actions humans take make our nature seem an awful lot more complex than just, I want to get married and stay that way till I die. Not to mention there are people who seem to have little to no interest in monogamy at all, and they're just as natural as the rest of us. However, this video seems directed more at Christians who believe there's a hell, so you're probably just trying to start from a position you think they already agree with, which, even if I find it questionable, is at least a strategy I can understand.
That is our will, our desire.
That is your will, your desire. I've seen your videos about Maria. I won't say anything more about it here because I don't really want to publicly stab at your emotional issues, but try to realize not everyone is like that.
That is the ultimate purpose of our lives.
That's a very interesting thing for a Christian to say. The ultimate purpose isn't to serve or worship or believe in God or Jesus or whatever, but just to find a loving partner and be together. Shit, I still don't think you're right, and I have a real distaste for this concept of ultimate purpose, but at least your idea sounds a little bit nicer than the usual Christianity, I mean, and more realistic. But I take back what I said about your strategy, because if your intention is to reel in the Christians, this is not likely to do it for many of them.
So wouldn't it make sense that that's completely God's will? Not hell, not sin, not Satan?
Why? Couldn't your ultimate purpose be to get married and stuff, but then God still wants hell and sin and Satan? There's no contradiction there. And what does any of this have to do with all that stuff about how God's developing reality second by second? You brought that up and I was curious, but it seems totally disconnected from the rest of the argument. Again with the half-thoughts. Still though, as half-baked and ineffective an argument as it is, I do at least appreciate the fact that you're trying to talk Christians out of their belief in hell. I actually really hope you succeed, so I kinda wish you do a better job at it.
I wonder if reality speaks higher than the Bible. I wonder.
Yes, I believe it does. I don't think reality's on your side any more than on the Bible's side, but it's a cool thought either way. That's another thing, by the way, that I noticed about you. You're willing to toss out the bits of the Bible you don't like. Check it out.
So if you compare the Old Testament to the New Testament, its morals, the Old Testament fails horribly. That's in place as a sort of test. The New Testament is much more loving, much more truthful, much more kind. So, if you want to know what's real, only love. Nothing in the Old Testament is real. Only love. So again, do what you please.
See, as deeply irrational as I find you to be, and as big of a dick as you can be sometimes, which is fine, some parts of your message are a lot nicer than what I usually reply to here. Thanks for that, seriously. Man, what an interesting guy. Thanks for your time, Jesus. I enjoyed that more than I expected. And thanks to everyone out there for watching. Remember to give the video a like, and subscribe if you want more from me, and if you really like my stuff, consider supporting me on Patreon like these amazing people. See you next time.